He kissed her to end a rumour, but the whole ballroom saw. Now he had to marry her. The Devonshire ball was, by universal agreement, the most anticipated event of the season, and Lady Rosalind Blackwood would rather have been anywhere else on earth. She stood near the towering arrangement of hothouse roses that flanked the entrance to the card-room, attempting to make herself invisible through sheer force of will. It was not working. Her mother's eyes found her across the ballroom with the unerring accuracy of a hawk spotting a particularly disappointing field mouse, and Rosalind watched the Countess of Ashby begin her determined navigation through the crush of silk and superficiality. "Damnation!" Rosalind muttered under her breath, then immediately felt guilty. Ladies did not curse, even quietly, even when they had every justification for doing so. But then again, ladies did not get caught emerging from libraries with notorious rakes either, and that ship had rather definitively sailed. She straightened her spine and prepared for the inevitable. Her mother had spent the past 3 weeks cycling through various emotional states regarding Rosalind's ruined reputation: fury, despair, renewed fury, a brief detour into theatrical weeping, and now a grim determination that bordered on mania. Tonight's mission was clear: find Rosalind a husband before the last shreds of her good name disintegrated entirely. The Countess arrived in a rustle of mauve silk and maternal disappointment. "There you are. I have been looking everywhere. Lord Pemberton has agreed to take you into supper. Lord Pemberton is 63 years old and has buried 3 wives. He is a viscount with excellent prospects and no living children. Do not be difficult, Rosalind." "I believe his 3rd wife died under somewhat mysterious circumstances, something about a fall down the stairs." "Gossip and speculation. The coroner ruled it an accident." Her mother's gloved fingers closed around Rosalind's elbow with surprising strength. "You are not in a position to be choosy, my dear, in case you have forgotten." Rosalind had not forgotten. It was rather impossible to forget when the whispers followed her like a poisonous fog wherever she went. She caught them even now, sidelong glances, fans raised to hide moving lips, the particular silence that fell when she approached a group of young ladies who had once been, if not friends, at least friendly acquaintances. "Did you hear about Lady Rosalind and Lord Crane?" "In the library, of all places. Lady Ashton found them herself. Well, what can you expect from a girl who reads political philosophy and argues with gentlemen about parliamentary reform? She always did think too highly of herself. Pride goeth before a fall, as they say." The irony was exquisite. Rosalind had spent 6 seasons carefully constructing a reputation as unmarriageable, too opinionated, too educated, too unwilling to simper and flutter and pretend she found discussions of needlework endlessly fascinating. She had built her armour of sharp wit and sharper tongue specifically to protect herself from the marriage mart, from the parade of gentlemen who wanted wives as decorative and silent as the furniture. And now, through no fault of her own, beyond stepping into the wrong room at the wrong moment, she was not merely unmarriageable, but actively scandalous. She had achieved what she thought: she wanted freedom from the expectation of marriage through the one means she would never have chosen. "Rosalind," her mother's voice carried a warning, "you will dance with Lord Pemberton. You will be charming and agreeable. You will not mention politics, literature, or any of your peculiar opinions about women's education. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Mother." "And for heaven's sake, do something about your hair. It's coming down again." Rosalind reached up to touch the loose tendril that had escaped her carefully arranged coiffure. Her hair had never behaved properly: too thick, too wavy, too determinedly red in a family of elegant blondes. Her mother had tried everything over the years: pomades, pins by the 100, once a disastrous experiment with a crimping iron that had resulted in Rosalind looking like a frightened poodle for an entire fortnight. "I shall endeavour to keep it contained." "See that you do." The Countess released her elbow and surveyed the ballroom with a general's eye. "Lord Pemberton is by the refreshment table. Go to him, now." Rosalind went, though not to Lord Pemberton. Instead, she executed a complicated series of maneuvers designed to suggest forward motion, while actually circling back toward the relative safety of the potted palms near the terrace doors. It was a technique she had perfected over 6 seasons of avoiding eligible gentlemen, and it worked beautifully right up until the moment she collided with something solid, warm, and exceedingly tall. "Oh!" She stumbled backward, and strong hands caught her shoulders to steady her. "I beg your pardon, I wasn't—" She looked up into a pair of grey eyes the colour of winter storms, set in a face that seemed to have been carved from particularly unforgiving marble. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and a mouth that looked as though it had never curved into a genuine smile in its entire existence. Sebastian Ashworth, the Marquis of Thornfield. The marble Marquis himself, so called for his reputation of cold perfection and rigid propriety. He was, by all accounts, the most eligible bachelor in England, and the least likely to ever show interest in a sharp-tongued scandal like herself. "Lady Rosalind." His voice was as cool as his expression, carefully modulated to convey nothing beyond basic civility. "Are you quite all right?" "Perfectly well, my lord. I was merely attempting to navigate the crowd and failed to account for immovable obstacles." One dark eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. "I believe the phrase you are looking for is— Excuse me, I did not see you there." "Is it? How fortunate that you are here to correct my etiquette. One would hate to commit a social faux pas." She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. Her tongue had always been her worst enemy. It moved faster than her sense of self-preservation could keep pace. Lord Thornfield's grey eyes assessed her with an expression she could not quite read. Disapproval, certainly. Perhaps a touch of surprise. And something else. Something that flickered and vanished before she could identify it. "Your reputation for plain speaking appears to be well earned. I prefer to think of it as refreshing honesty in a sea of polite prevarication, but I suppose the distinction is in the eye of the beholder." "Indeed." He released her shoulders. She had not realized he was still holding them and stepped back, restoring the proper distance between them. "If you will excuse me, Lady Rosalind." He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd with the easy grace of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. Rosalind stared after him, her shoulders still warm where his hands had rested, her heart beating rather faster than a simple collision should warrant. Insufferable man, she thought. Cold, arrogant, judgmental. "Rosalind!" Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "Why are you not with Lord Pemberton?" She turned to face the next battle, pushing the Marquis of Thornfield firmly from her mind. Sebastian Ashworth accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman and retreated to his preferred position near the card-room, where he could observe the ballroom without being forced to participate in its endless social machinations. Lady Rosalind Blackwood. He had heard the rumours, of course everyone had heard the rumours. The Earl of Ashby's youngest daughter, caught in a compromising position with Lord Bartholomew Crane at Lady Ashton's house party. The details varied, depending on who was telling the tale, but the conclusion was always the same. Lady Rosalind was ruined. Sebastian had known her father, briefly. The late Earl had been a man of quiet honour and intellectual curiosity, and Sebastian had respected him. He had died 4 years ago, leaving his title to his only son and his 3 daughters, to the uncertain care of a mother whose chief concerns appeared to be social advancement and personal comfort. The current situation was unfortunate. Sebastian had no particular opinion about Lady Rosalind herself. He had barely exchanged a dozen words with her before tonight, but he felt a vague sense of responsibility toward the Blackwood family that had nothing to do with any personal connection. It was simply what one did. Honour demanded that gentlemen protect ladies. even ladies with sharp tongues and sharper wit. Not that Lady Rosalind seemed particularly interested in protection. She had all but accused him of standing in her way deliberately, and her green eyes had flashed with an intelligence that he found unexpectedly notable. Most young ladies simpered and fluttered when confronted with a marquis. Lady Rosalind had practically dared him to find fault with her. "Thornfield!" A heavy hand clapped his shoulder, and Sebastian turned to find Lord Bartholomew Crane grinning at him with the loose, unfocused expression of a man who had visited the punch bowl several times too many. "Haven't seen you in an age. Come to find a bride at last, have you? God knows there are enough eager mammas throwing their daughters at your head." Sebastian's expression did not change, but something cold settled in his chest. He had never liked Crane. The man was a rake of the worst sort, not merely dissolute, but mean-spirited with it. He treated women as conquests, to be boasted of, rather than people to be respected. "Good evening, Crane." "Evening, evening." Crane swayed slightly and steadied himself against a nearby pillar. "Quite a crush, isn't it? Though I must say, the quality of the goods on offer has declined somewhat. All these simpering little debutantes, no spirit to them at all. Not like some, eh?" Sebastian remained silent. He had perfected the art of saying nothing over many years, and he deployed it now with practiced ease. Crane, unfortunately, was too drunk to take the hint. "Speaking of spirited ladies, have you heard about my little adventure at Lady Ashton's? The Blackwood girl, you know. The redhead with the sharp tongue." "I had heard something." "I imagine everyone has heard something by now. Delicious scandal, absolutely delicious." Crane's grin widened into something that made Sebastian's fists clench involuntarily. "She was a lively one, I'll give her that. Tried to pretend she was offended when I found her in the library, but you know how these blue-stocking types are. All that reading about classical romance, they're positively desperate for a real man to show them what it's all about." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Is that so?" "Oh, yes. She put up a token resistance, of course they always do, but in the end—" Crane made a gesture that was unmistakably obscene. "Well, let's just say Lady Ashton interrupted before things could reach their natural conclusion, but I'm confident the lady would have been very grateful for the education." "You speak very freely about a gentlewoman's reputation." Crane laughed. "What reputation? Everyone knows what happened. I'm merely confirming the details for those who are curious." He leaned closer, his breath sour with wine. "Between us, Thornfield, she was rather disappointing. All that fire in public. But alone she was practically trembling. Frightened little virgin playing at being sophisticated. I prefer my women with a bit more experience, if you know what I mean." Sebastian knew exactly what he meant. He also knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that Crane was lying. Everything about the man's manner screamed performance, the exaggeration, the crude details, the way he watched Sebastian's face for a reaction. This was not confession, but theatre, designed to inflate Crane's reputation at Lady Rosalind's expense. "If you will excuse me," Sebastian said, setting down his untouched champagne, "I believe I see someone I must speak with." Of course, of course. Give my regards to whoever it is. And if you happen to see the Blackwood girl, tell her I'm available for another private tutorial whenever she likes." Crane's laughter followed Sebastian as he walked away, grating against his ears like broken glass. He should do nothing. It was not his affair. Lady Rosalind Blackwood was nothing to him, a chance acquaintance, the daughter of a man he had barely known. Her reputation was not his to protect, and his interference would only create more gossip. But as he moved through the crowd, he found himself scanning the ballroom for a glimpse of copper-red hair. Rosalind had successfully avoided Lord Pemberton, by the simple expedient of hiding behind a group of particularly substantial matrons, but her luck was about to run out. She could see her mother bearing down on her with the 63-year-old Viscount in tow, his watery blue eyes and slightly yellowish complexion making him look less like a potential husband and more like a portrait in need of restoration. She had perhaps 30 seconds to make her escape. The terrace doors were closest. She slipped through them into the cool night air, gasping with relief as the noise of the ballroom faded to a muffled roar behind her. The Devonshire gardens stretched before her, silvered by moonlight, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine simply walking away down the gravel paths, through the ornamental hedges, out the garden gate, and into a life where Lady Rosalind Blackwood and all her failures simply ceased to exist. But no, she could not abandon her family entirely, no matter how tempting the prospect. Her elder sisters were both married with children of their own, but her mother depended on her for company and support, and her father's memory deserved better than a daughter who fled her responsibilities at the first sign of difficulty. "Taking the air, Lady Rosalind?" She spun to find Lord Crane emerging from the shadows at the edge of the terrace. Her heart stuttered in her chest, and she took an involuntary step backward. "Lord Crane, I did not see you there." "Evidently not." He moved closer, and she could smell the wine on his breath, even from several feet away. "You left the ballroom in quite a hurry. Anyone would think you were trying to escape something. I merely wanted a moment of quiet." "Quiet?" He laughed, the sound unpleasant in the darkness. "Yes, I imagine the noise of everyone discussing your adventures must be rather wearing. All those whispers and sidelong glances. It must be terribly fatiguing, being the subject of such intense interest." Rosalind's chin lifted. "I have nothing to be ashamed of, my lord. Whatever lies you have been spreading." "Lies? My dear Lady Rosalind, I have said nothing that was not true." He took another step toward her, and she retreated again, her back nearly touching the balustrade. "We were alone in that library together. We did share a moment. If people have drawn conclusions, well, that is hardly my fault. Nothing happened in that library. You followed me in uninvited. You made unwelcome advances, and I left. That is the entirety of our moment. That's not how I remember it." "Then your memory is as defective as your character." Something ugly flickered across his face. "You always did have a sharp tongue. I wonder if it would be quite so sharp if you understood your position properly. You are ruined, Lady Rosalind. No gentleman of any standing will offer for you now. Your only hope is to find someone willing to overlook your history in exchange for certain considerations. And I suppose you imagine yourself to be that someone?" "I could be." He was too close now, close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. "I am not without influence. A word from me, suggesting that the rumors were exaggerated, that nothing of consequence actually occurred. It could go a long way toward restoring your reputation. And in exchange?" His smile made her stomach turn. "In exchange, you would show me the gratitude that such a service deserves. Nothing unreasonable, a private arrangement, discreet and mutually beneficial. You would not be the first lady of quality to reach such an understanding, and I assure you I can be quite generous." For a moment Rosalind was speechless. The sheer audacity of it, the casual assumption that she would trade her body for his protection, that she had no other options, no other value, rendered her temporarily mute. Then the rage hit. "You repulsive, loathsome, festering excuse for a gentleman!" Her voice shook, but not with fear. "You create a scandal through your own unwanted attentions. You spread lies about what occurred, and then you have the unmitigated gall to suggest that I should be grateful for the opportunity to become your mistress. I would rather die a spinster in poverty than accept a single thing from you. Be careful, Lady Rosalind." His tone had shifted, the false pleasantness dropping away to reveal something harder beneath. "You have very few friends left in society. It would be unwise to make an enemy of me. I would rather have you as an enemy than anything else." "Then you shall have your wish." He stepped back, straightening his waistcoat with elaborate care. "I had thought to be kind, given our history, but I see my generosity is wasted on you. Very well. Let us return to the ballroom and see how your reputation fares without my protection." He turned and walked back through the terrace doors, leaving Rosalind alone in the darkness, her heart pounding and her hands trembling with fury. She should not follow him. She should stay here, compose herself, and return to the ballroom when she could be certain of keeping her temper under control. But something about the set of his shoulders, the confidence in his stride, told her that he was planning something, that returning to the ballroom meant more than simply resuming the evening's entertainments. Against her better judgment, she followed. Sebastian saw Crane return from the terrace and felt a prickle of unease at the man's expression. There was a malicious satisfaction in the set of his jaw, a gleeful anticipation that suggested nothing good. A moment later, Lady Rosalind appeared through the same doors. Her face was pale, her green eyes bright with barely suppressed emotion, and one copper curl had escaped its pins to spiral against her cheek. She looked, Sebastian thought, like a woman who had just been through an ordeal and was determined not to show it. He should look away. Whatever had passed between her and Crane on the terrace was not his concern. Instead, he found himself moving closer to where Crane had positioned himself, near a group of young gentlemen, Lord Westbrook, Mr. Hartley, Sir Edmund Chase. All of them fashionable, wealthy, and influential, in the peculiar way that young men of the ton could be influential. Their opinions shaped the marriage market as surely as any matron's whisper. "I say, Crane, where did you disappear to?" Westbrook was asking. "We were about to start a hand of whist." "Just stepped out for some air." Crane's voice carried just far enough to be heard by those nearby, including several young ladies and their chaperones. "Though I must say, I had rather unexpected company." "Oh?" Hartley leaned in with interest. "Anyone we know?" "The Blackwood girl, the redhead." Crane's smile widened. "Followed me out onto the terrace. I think she hoped for a repeat of our encounter at Lady Ashton's." Sebastian's hands clenched at his sides. "Really?" Sir Edmund raised an eyebrow. "Bold of her, given the circumstances. Some ladies simply cannot help themselves. All that repressed passion, you know these blue-stocking types are positively desperate for masculine attention, though I must say her technique has not improved much since the last time. Still rather too eager, if you catch my meaning." The young men laughed, and Sebastian saw several nearby listeners exchange knowing glances. The damage was being done with every word, not just repeating the original rumour, but embellishing it, adding new details that would be repeated and amplified until Lady Rosalind's reputation was not merely tarnished, but utterly destroyed. "Did she throw herself at you again, then?" Westbrook asked, clearly enjoying the entertainment. "Oh, she made her interest very plain. Practically begged me to compromise her properly this time, so that I would be forced to offer for her, as if I would shackle myself to such a desperate creature." Crane shook his head in mock sorrow. "I had to be quite firm with her. Some ladies simply cannot accept rejection gracefully." "Crane." The single word cut through the laughter like a blade. Sebastian had not consciously decided to speak, but there he was, standing 3 feet from the group, with an expression that made Westbrook take an involuntary step backward. "Thornfield." Crane's smile flickered, but did not disappear. "Come to join the conversation?" "I was just telling the fellows about my latest admirer." "I heard. I suggest you stop." "I beg your pardon?" "You are telling lies about a gentlewoman. I suggest you stop doing so before I am forced to take action." A ripple of tension passed through the gathered listeners. Sebastian Ashworth never made scenes. He never involved himself in other people's affairs. He was known throughout London as a man of impeccable restraint and perfect propriety, and now he was publicly threatening one of the most notorious rakes in society. Lies? Crane's expression hardened. I am merely relating events as they occurred. If you object to the truth, I was watching the terrace doors. Lady Rosalind did not follow you outside. She was already there when you approached her. Whatever occurred between you was clearly not initiated by the lady. You were watching the terrace doors. Crane's smile twisted into something ugly. How terribly interested in Lady Rosalind's movements you must be. One might almost think you had a personal investment in her reputation. Tell me, Thornfield, is there something you wish to confess? The implication hung in the air like smoke. Sebastian felt the weight of 100 staring eyes, heard the rustle of fans and the intake of breath that signaled fresh scandal brewing. I have nothing to confess beyond a distaste for liars and cowards who attack defenseless women. Defenseless? Crane laughed. Have you met the woman? She's about as defenseless as a cobra, and I assure you she was not complaining when... You will be silent. Or what? Crane stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss that was somehow still audible to everyone nearby. What will you do, Thornfield? Call me out? That would be a scandal indeed, the Marble Marquis duelling over the honour of a ruined blue-stocking. People might begin to wonder what your real connection to the lady is. Perhaps you were the one in the library with her. Perhaps you've been warming her bed all along, and I'm simply the convenient scapegoat. Sebastian's vision narrowed to a single point. Crane's smirking, wine-flushed face. 12 years of carefully cultivated control trembled on the edge of collapse. He thought of Arabella, of how gossip and rumour had pursued her even after death, of how people had whispered that she got what she deserved for running off with an unsuitable man. He thought of Lady Rosalind's face on the terrace, pale with humiliation and fury, and something that looked terribly like despair. And then, without any conscious decision, he was moving. Rosalind had not meant to get close enough to hear. She had been trying to skirt the edges of the group, to return to her mother's side before Lord Crane could cause any further damage. But the crowd had shifted around her, trapping her in a pocket of space where every word was painfully audible. She heard Crane's lies about the terrace, his insinuations about her character, his casual destruction of whatever shreds of reputation she had left. She heard the laughter of the young men, the scandalized whispers of the nearby matrons. She felt the weight of it pressing down on her like a physical force, squeezing the breath from her lungs. And then Lord Thornfield was there, defending her. The Marble Marquis, who had no reason to involve himself, who had every reason to stay far away from her toxic scandal, was publicly confronting Lord Crane on her behalf. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt a rising tide of panic. His intervention would only make things worse, would only add fuel to the speculation, give credence to Crane's insinuations that there was something between them. She needed to leave. She needed to get out of here before... I think, Lord Crane was saying, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom, that if Lord Thornfield is so concerned with Lady Rosalind's virtue, perhaps he should ask her about it himself. Here she is, after all hovering nearby like the desperate creature she is. Tell me, Lady Rosalind, would you like me to kiss you again? I'm sure Lord Thornfield would enjoy watching. Every head turned toward her, every eye fixed on her face. She could feel the blood draining from her cheeks, could feel her carefully constructed armor crumbling around her. She had no witty response. She had no sharp retort. For the first time in her adult life, Lady Rosalind Blackwood was struck completely, devastatingly mute. Her voice failed. She swallowed and tried again. You are a liar, Lord Crane. Nothing happened between us. Nothing has ever happened between us. You followed me into that library uninvited, and I left the moment I realized you were there. That's not what I remember. Then perhaps you should drink less. It seems to be affecting your memory. The retort was weak, thin, not at all up to her usual standards. She could see the pity in some faces, and the gleeful anticipation of more scandal in others. This was it, she realized. This was the moment when she became truly, irretrievably ruined, not by any action of her own, but by the words of a man who could not bear to be rejected. "Come now, Lady Rosalind." Crane took a step toward her, and she forced herself not to retreat. "There's no need for coyness. Everyone knows what happened. Everyone knows what you are. Why not simply admit it and save yourself the embarrassment of pretending to be something better? Because it would be a lie." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Would it? Tell me, if nothing happened between us, why are you so upset? An innocent woman would simply laugh off baseless accusations. But you—" He smiled, slow and terrible. "You react as though you have something to hide. What are you hiding, Lady Rosalind? What did we do in that library that you're so desperate to keep secret?" She could not breathe. The walls of the ballroom were closing in, the crystal chandeliers spinning overhead, the faces of the crowd blurring into a mass of judgment and condemnation. "Perhaps," Crane continued, moving closer still, "you would like me to remind you, right here, in front of everyone. That way there would be no more doubt about the nature of our—" He never finished the sentence. One moment he was reaching for her, his hand extended toward her arm. The next moment, Sebastian Ashworth, Marquis of Thornfield, had crossed the space between them in 3 swift strides, taken Rosalind by the shoulders, and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a polite brush of lips suitable for a public ballroom. It was thorough, claiming unmistakable a statement rather than a question, a declaration rather than a request. His mouth moved against hers with an intensity that stole her breath and her thoughts and possibly her sanity. She should push him away. She should protest. She should do something other than stand frozen in his arms while her heart tried to beat its way out of her chest. Instead, she found herself leaning into him, her hands gripping the lapels of his coat, her lips parting beneath the pressure of his. The kiss lasted 3 seconds, or 3 hours, she could not have said which. When he finally lifted his head, the ballroom was utterly, deafeningly silent. Lord Thornfield's grey eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that looked almost like shock, as though he could not quite believe what he had just done. Then his expression shifted, settling into the familiar lines of aristocratic composure. "It seems," he said, his voice pitched to carry across the frozen tableau of London's finest, "that I must announce my betrothal to Lady Rosalind. I hope you will all wish us very happy." The silence stretched for another eternal moment. Then the ballroom erupted. Rosalind barely heard the explosion of whispers, exclamations, and scandalized gasps that surrounded her. She was too busy staring at the man who had just commandeered her entire future, trying to understand what had possessed him to do something so utterly, catastrophically insane. "Lord Thornfield," she managed, "what have you done?" "I believe I have just become engaged to you, Lady Rosalind." "But why?" His expression did not change, but something flickered in those grey eyes, something that might have been regret or might have been determination. "Because it was the only way to silence Lord Crane's lies. Because your reputation required it. Because—" He paused, and for a moment his mask slipped. "Because I could not stand by and watch him destroy you." Before she could respond, her mother materialized at her elbow, her face cycling through, expressions so rapidly that Rosalind could not keep track of them. Shock, bewilderment, cautious hope, and finally a kind of triumphant satisfaction that made Rosalind's stomach turn.
"Lord Thornfield, my daughter, this is most unexpected."
"I apologize for the irregular manner of my proposal, Lady Ashby. I hope you will permit me to call upon Lord Ashby tomorrow morning to discuss the settlements properly."
"Yes,
Of course." The Countess was almost vibrating with barely contained excitement. "We would be honored to receive you. Rosalind, say something to your betrothed." Rosalind looked at Sebastian Ashworth, this cold, controlled, utterly confounding man who had just destroyed both their reputations in an attempt to save hers. His face revealed nothing. His grey eyes were steady on hers, waiting for her response. What did one say to the stranger who had just kissed you senseless and announced your engagement to 300 of London's most influential gossips?
"I hope," she said finally, "that you know what you have done, my lord, because I certainly don't."
Something that might have been amusement flickered at the corner of his mouth. "Neither do I, Lady Rosalind, but I suspect we will have ample time to figure it out together." The crowd was beginning to press closer now, eager to offer congratulations and extract more details. Rosalind saw Lord Crane at the edge of the gathering, his face mottled with fury and disbelief. She saw her mother practically glowing with vindicated maternal satisfaction. She saw the faces of everyone who had whispered about her, judged her, written her off as ruined, now staring at her with a new kind of speculation. And she felt Lord Thornfield's hand close around hers, warm and steady, and utterly unexpected, as he drew her closer to his side. "Smile," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "We are happy, remember? Are we? We must appear to be. The alternative is unthinkable." Rosalind looked up into his grey eyes, searching for some sign of what he was truly feeling. She found nothing but that marble composure, that impenetrable facade that had earned him his sobriquet. She had spent 6 years avoiding marriage. She had resigned herself to spinsterhood with something approaching relief. And now, because of one impulsive, incomprehensible kiss, she was engaged to the coldest man in London, a man who did not want her, who had acted from duty rather than desire, who would almost certainly regret this moment for the rest of his life. She should be devastated. She should be furious. Instead, she found herself remembering the feel of his mouth on hers, the strength of his arms around her, the way his kiss had made her forget everything except the taste of him. And she wondered with a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope whether the marble marquis might not be quite as cold as he appeared. The morning after the Devonshire ball dawned grey and drizzling, as though the sky itself disapproved of the previous evening's events. Rosalind stood at her bedroom window, watching raindrops trace their paths down the glass, and tried to convince herself that everything would somehow be all right. It was not working. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the pressure of Lord Thornfield's mouth on hers, saw the flash of something unreadable in his grey eyes, heard his voice announcing their engagement to a ballroom full of London's most dedicated gossips. The memory should have been mortifying. Instead, it sent a peculiar warmth spreading through her chest that she could not quite explain. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Rosalind?" Her mother's voice carried the particular tone of barely contained excitement that had characterized her behavior since they returned home. "Lord Thornfield's carriage has been spotted turning onto the street. Come downstairs at once. We must be ready to receive him." "I shall be down presently, mother." "See that you are, and do something with your hair. It looks as though you've been through a hedge backward." Rosalind touched her copper curls, which had indeed escaped their nighttime braid, to spiral in wild abandon around her face. She supposed she should care more about her appearance. She was about to face the man who would be her husband after all. The thought sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning's damp air. 20 minutes later, she sat in the drawing-room with her mother, her brother, and her sister-in-law, waiting for Lord Thornfield to be announced. Her brother Edmund, the current Earl of Ashby, had been roused from his bed at an unprecedented hour to receive the Marquis, and his expression suggested that he had not yet forgiven anyone involved for the inconvenience. "This is highly irregular," he muttered, adjusting his cravat for the 5th time. "A betrothal announced at a ball, without any prior discussion of settlements or family approval. What was the man thinking?" "He was thinking of saving your sister's reputation," their mother said sharply, "which is more than you have managed to do in the 3 weeks since the rumours began." Edmund flushed. "That is hardly fair. The situation with Crane was handled disastrously by everyone except Lord Thornfield," the Countess interrupted. "Whatever his reasons, he has offered Rosalind the protection of his name and his consequence. We should be grateful." "Should we?" Rosalind spoke for the first time, her voice quiet. "We know nothing about him, Mother. Nothing about why he did what he did, or what he expects from this marriage. For all we know, he could be a marquis with 40,000 a year and one of the finest estates in England," her mother cut in. "Whatever else he might be, those facts remain constant. You are in no position to be particular, Rosalind." Before Rosalind could respond, the butler appeared in the doorway. "The Marquis of Thornfield, my lady." And there he was, tall, dark, impeccably dressed, in a coat of deep blue superfine that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the cool grey of his eyes. He looked exactly as he had the night before, minus the momentary loss of control that had led him to kiss her senseless in front of 300 witnesses. The marble Marquis was firmly back in place. "Lord Ashby, Lady Ashby." He bowed with precise formality. "Lady Edmund, Lady Rosalind." His gaze lingered on her face for a fraction of a second longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for receiving me. Lord Thornfield." Edmund rose and extended his hand. "I understand we have much to discuss." "Indeed. I apologize for the irregular nature of last evening's announcement. I hope to rectify that irregularity by conducting the rest of our negotiations in the proper manner." "Negotiations?" Rosalind's voice was flat. "How romantic." Lord Thornfield's eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker in their grey depths, surprise, perhaps, or irritation. "I believe romance is best left for novels, Lady Rosalind. In the real world, marriage is a practical matter requiring practical discussion." "How fortunate that you have arrived to educate me on the realities of the situation. I had been labouring under the misapprehension that I might have some say in my own future." "Rosalind," her mother's voice carried a warning. "No, let her speak." Lord Thornfield's tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. "I suspect Lady Rosalind and I will need to reach an understanding before we proceed. Perhaps a private conversation would be in order." Edmund frowned. "That would be highly appropriate, given our engagement." Lord Thornfield's grey eyes never left Rosalind's face. "We are to be married, Lord Ashby. Surely you can permit us a few moments of chaperoned privacy to discuss the arrangement." There was a brief, charged silence. Then Edmund nodded reluctantly. "Very well. You may use the small parlour across the hall, but Lady Ashby will remain within earshot." "Of course." Rosalind found herself being escorted across the hall by the man who had upended her entire existence, his hand at the small of her back, sending inappropriate shivers down her spine. The small parlour was cold and slightly musty, having been little used since her father's death, but at least it offered the illusion of privacy. Lord Thornfield closed the door until it stood only slightly ajar, then turned to face her. Lady Rosalind, I believe we should speak plainly. By all means. Plainness is rather my specialty, as you may have noticed. I had noticed, yes. His expression did not change, but something in his tone suggested that he found her directness less objectionable than his words implied. Very well. I shall be plain. I did not plan what happened last night. I acted on impulse, something I have not done in many years, and I regret the irregular manner in which our engagement was announced. You regret it? The manner of announcement, not the engagement itself. He paused, seeming to choose his next words with care. Lord Crane was destroying your reputation with his lies. I could not stand by and watch, but I should have found a less dramatic way to intervene. Rosalind studied his face, searching for any crack in that marble facade. Why did you intervene at all? You barely know me. We have exchanged perhaps a dozen words in our lives before last night. Why should my reputation matter to you? For a long moment he did not answer. Then he said quietly, I knew your father. You knew my father? Briefly. We served together on a parliamentary committee some years ago, before his health declined. He was a good man, honourable, principled, genuinely concerned with doing what was right rather than what was expedient. Lord Thornfield's grey eyes met hers. I could not watch his daughter be destroyed by a snake-like Crane. It would have been a betrayal of everything your father represented. It was not the answer she had expected. She had imagined many motivations for his extraordinary behaviour: temporary insanity, mistaken identity, some complicated scheme she could not fathom, but simple respect for her father's memory had not occurred to her. I see, she said finally. So this is... what? A debt of honour? An obligation to a dead man? In part. And the rest? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The rest is difficult to explain. Try. Another long pause. Rosalind watched his face, fascinated despite herself by the minute shifts in his expression, the slight tension around his eyes, the barely visible tightening of his lips. The marble Marquis was not quite as marble as he appeared. When I kissed you, he said at last, I intended only to stake a claim, to make it clear that you were under my protection, not Crane's, that any man who spoke against you would answer to me. A territorial display, then. How flattering. But when I actually kissed you... He stopped, started again. It was not what I expected. Rosalind's heart was beating too fast. What did you expect? A performance, a necessary fiction. Instead, his grey eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. I find myself uncertain, which is not a sensation I am accustomed to. Uncertainty? About anything. He turned away, moving to the window where rain still streaked the glass. I have built my life on certainty, Lady Rosalind. On control, on reason, on the suppression of anything that might lead to emotional chaos, and in one moment of impulse I have thrown all of that away. Because you kissed me. Because I cannot stop thinking about kissing you. The admission seemed to cost him something, which is entirely beside the point. What matters now is how we proceed. Rosalind's mind was reeling, but she forced herself to focus on the practical. Whatever he felt, whatever she might be beginning to feel, the reality of their situation remained unchanged. How do you propose we proceed? He turned back to face her, his expression once again composed. I am suggesting a marriage of convenience, a practical arrangement with clear boundaries. In public, we will present a united front. In private, we will maintain separate lives as much as possible. I will not interfere with your pursuits, and you will not interfere with mine. How very generous. I am trying to be fair, Lady Rosalind. You did not ask to be thrust into this situation, and neither did I. The least we can do is make it tolerable for both parties. Tolerable? She tasted the word like something bitter. That is your ambition for our marriage? Tolerability? What would you prefer? A love match? His voice carried an edge of something that might have been mockery, or might have been pain. I am not capable of that, Lady Rosalind. I thought you should know before we proceed. Not capable, or not willing? Does it matter? The outcome is the same. He straightened his already immaculate cuffs, a gesture that she was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. I am offering you my name, my protection, and complete freedom within the bounds of our arrangement. In return, I ask only for discretion and a public performance of marital harmony. That is more than most marriages of the tongue can claim. He was right. She knew he was right. Most society marriages were far worse than what he was proposing. Cold arrangements punctuated by affairs, separate lives maintained behind facades of respectability, children raised by nurses while their parents pursued pleasure elsewhere. What Lord Thornfield offered was at least honest, but something in her rebelled against the calculation of it. Some foolish romantic part of her, that she had thought long dead, wanted more than tolerance and boundaries and practical arrangements. Very well, she heard herself say, I accept your terms. Something flickered across his face. Relief, perhaps, or disappointment. She could not tell. Then we are agreed. I shall speak with your brother about the settlements this afternoon. The wedding will take place in 3 weeks, to give the gossip time to die down. 3 weeks. It seemed impossibly soon. Is there anything else? Only this. He moved toward her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and masculine that made her think of winter forests. Whatever happens between us privately, whatever walls we maintain, I will never publicly shame you. I will never give the gossips ammunition to use against you. You will have the full protection of my name and my consequence, and anyone who speaks against you will answer to me. That is my promise. Rosalind looked up into his grey eyes, searching for deceit, and finding only a cold, steady sincerity that was somehow more affecting than any passionate declaration could have been. Thank you, she said quietly. That means a great deal. He nodded once, sharply, then stepped back. I shall return this. Afternoon to speak with Lord Ashby. Until then, Lady Rosalind. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in the cold parlour with her thoughts in chaos and his scent still lingering in the air. The weeks between the announcement and the wedding passed in a blur of activity that left Rosalind little time for reflection. There were settlements to be negotiated, trousseaux to be assembled, invitations to be sent, and an endless parade of curious well-wishers to be received, most of them transparently eager for gossip, rather than genuinely interested in her happiness. Through it all, Lord Thornfield's Sebastian, as she was now expected to call him, though the intimacy felt forced, maintained a perfect facade of devoted attention. He called every afternoon, escorted her to required social events, and treated her in public with precisely the right degree of warmth and possessiveness to silence any lingering speculation about the nature of their engagement. In private he was courteous, distant, and utterly unreadable. Rosalind told herself she preferred it that way. The arrangement was clear, the boundaries well defined, the expectations realistic. She would be a marchioness, mistress of a great estate, freed from her mother's criticism and society's condemnation. It was more than she had ever expected to achieve. If she sometimes caught herself watching Sebastian's face for cracks in his armour, hoping for some sign of the man who had kissed her with such unexpected passion, well, that was merely curiosity, nothing more. The first real breach in his defences came 10 days before the wedding, when Sebastian announced that he wished to introduce her to his grandmother. The Dowager Marchioness lives at the Dower House on the Thornfield estate, he explained during one of their afternoon drives through Hyde Park. She is elderly and does not often come to London, but she has expressed a strong desire to meet my future wife. Your grandmother. Rosalind tried to imagine what sort of woman had produced the marble marquis. Is she very fearsome? She is. He paused, and Rosalind saw something shift in his expression, a softening that she had never witnessed before. She is the finest woman I have ever known. I think you will like her. You sound surprised. I am. I do not often think people will like each other. He guided the horses around a slower carriage with easy competence. In this case, however, I believe there may be a compatibility of temperament. You mean we are both sharp-tongued and difficult? The corner of his mouth twitched. I mean you are both intelligent, direct, and unimpressed by social pretension. My grandmother has never suffered fools gladly, and neither, I suspect, do you. It was, Rosalind realized, the closest thing to a compliment he had ever paid her. They departed for Thornfield Park the following morning, travelling in Sebastian's well-sprung carriage with her maid and his valet as chaperones. The journey took most of the day, and Rosalind found herself gradually relaxing as London fell away behind them. The countryside was beautiful rolling hills, ancient forests, and neat little villages that looked like illustrations from a storybook. Sebastian pointed out landmarks as they passed, offering brief histories of the estates they could see from the road, and Rosalind found herself genuinely interested in spite of herself. You know a great deal about the area, she observed. I grew up here. Thornfield Park has been in my family for 12 generations. He gazed out the window at a particularly picturesque view. I spent every summer here as a child, learning to ride and fish and manage the tenant farms. My father believed that a marquis should understand the land he would one day inherit. And did you? Understand it, I mean? I tried. I am still trying. He turned back to face her, and for a moment his guard seemed to lower. There is always more to learn, more people to care for, more responsibilities to shoulder, more ways to fail the people who depend on you. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it is also, he searched for the word, meaningful. There are 300 families who work my lands, live in my cottages, depend on my decisions for their livelihoods. Their children go to the school I built, worship in the church I maintain, receive care from the physician I employ. What I do matters to them in ways that nothing I could ever do in London matters to anyone. Rosalind studied his face, seeing something she had not expected, passion. Beneath the marble exterior, Sebastian Ashworth genuinely cared about his responsibilities. He was not merely performing the role of marquis. He was trying, desperately, to do it well. You surprise me, she said quietly. Do I? How so? I thought you were... She stopped, uncertain how to phrase it without giving offence. Cold? Unfeeling? Made of marble? His tone was dry, but not hostile. Yes, I am aware of my reputation. It is not entirely undeserved. But it is not entirely accurate either. He did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice was carefully neutral. Perhaps not. But the parts of me that feel are not for public consumption. They are dangerous. Dangerous? Caring too much leads to loss. Loss leads to pain. Pain leads to destruction. He spoke as though reciting a formula he had memorized long ago. I learned that lesson early and have never forgotten it. Rosalind wanted to ask what had taught him such a bitter truth, but something in his expression warned her away. Instead, she simply nodded and turned back to the window, watching the landscape unfold. They reached Thornfield Park as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Rosalind's first glimpse of the house took her breath away, a sprawling Elizabethan manor of honey-coloured stone, surrounded by manicured gardens and framed by ancient oaks that must have been standing since Henry VIII sat the throne.
"It's beautiful," she breathed. "It will be your home."
Sebastian's voice was quiet.
"I hope you will be happy here."
She looked at him, startled by the apparent sincerity in his words. For a moment their eyes met, and something passed between them, some acknowledgment of the strange intimacy they were about to share, bound together by circumstance rather than choice. Then the moment passed, and Sebastian was helping her down from the carriage, greeting the assembled servants, playing the role of master with practiced ease. But Rosalind did not forget the look in his eyes when he said he hoped she would be happy. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if the marble marquis might not be quite so indifferent to her as he pretended. The Dowager Marchioness was nothing like Rosalind expected. Where she had imagined a formidable, forbidding grande dame, she found instead a tiny, bright-eyed woman of perhaps 80 years, wrapped in shawls despite the warmth of the fire, with silver hair piled atop her head, and a mischievous smile that made her look decades younger.
"So, you are the girl who finally caught my grandson," she said, looking Rosalind up and down with frank assessment. "I must say, you are not what I anticipated."
"No, grandmother, I imagine she is not." Sebastian's voice carried the first genuine warmth Rosalind had ever heard from him. He bent to kiss the old woman's papery cheek, and his entire demeanour softened in a way that made Rosalind's heart clench unexpectedly.
"Lady Rosalind, may I present my grandmother, Henrietta Ashworth, Dowager Marchioness of Thornfield. Grandmother, my betrothed, Lady Rosalind Blackwood."
"Sit, sit." The Dowager waved Rosalind toward a chair near the fire. "Let me look at you properly. Sebastian, stop hovering. Go find something useful to do while I interrogate your future wife." "I am not certain that is wise. I am 83 years old and have been managing this family since before you were born. I am entirely capable of conducting a private conversation without supervision." The Dowager fixed her grandson with a look that brooked no argument. "Out! I shall ring when we are finished." Sebastian hesitated, glancing at Rosalind with something that might have been concern. She gave him what she hoped was a reassuring nod, and he departed reluctantly, leaving her alone with the formidable little woman by the fire. "Now then," the Dowager leaned forward, her bright eyes shrewd. "Tell me the truth. Do you love him?" Rosalind blinked, startled by the directness.
We have only known each other a few weeks, my lady. Love seems a rather strong word under the circumstances."
An honest answer, at least. Most girls in your position would claim undying devotion and bore me to tears with raptures about his handsomeness and consequence. The Dowager sat back in her chair, studying Rosalind with unsettling intensity. "You are aware that he kissed you in the middle of the Devonshire
ball, in front of half of London, specifically to save your reputation?" "I am aware, though I confess I do not entirely understand why. Neither does he, I suspect. Sebastian has not done an impulsive thing in 12 years. The Dowager's expression grew thoughtful. "Not since Arabella." The name hung in the air like a ghost. Rosalind remembered Sebastian mentioning a sister in passing, but she had not pressed for details. "His sister, his younger sister, my granddaughter." The Dowager's voice softened with old grief. "She was everything Sebastian is not: passionate, impulsive, ruled by her heart rather than her head. He adored her, When she eloped with an unsuitable man against all advice, Sebastian blamed himself for not stopping her. When the marriage ended badly and she— The old woman paused, composing herself. When we lost her, something in Sebastian froze solid. He mentioned that caring too much was dangerous, Rosalind said quietly. Did he? That sounds like him. He has convinced himself that feeling leads to destruction, that the only safe course is to seal his heart away where nothing can touch it. The dowager reached out and took Rosalind's hand in her own, her grip surprisingly strong. But he kissed you, my dear, in public, without thought for consequence or propriety. Do you understand what that means? It means he was trying to help me. It means something reached him. Something broke through that wall he has spent 12 years building. The dowager's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I have prayed for this. I have watched my grandson turn himself to stone, and I have prayed that someone would find a way to reach him before it was too late. My lady, I am not certain I am the right person for that task. Lord Thornfield has made it very clear that ours is to be a marriage of convenience. Convenient for whom? Not for him, I assure you. A man does not kiss a woman like that because it is convenient. The dowager squeezed her hand. He is afraid, Lady Rosalind, terrified. He loved his sister with his whole heart, and losing her nearly destroyed him. He believes that the safest course is never to love again. But safety and happiness are not the same thing. Rosalind did not know what to say. The picture the dowager painted was so different from the cold, controlled man she had come to know, and yet it explained so much. The walls he maintained, the distance he kept, the flickers of warmth that he immediately suppressed. "What would you have me do?" she asked finally. "Be patient. Be stubborn. Do not let him push you away, no matter how hard he tries." The dowager smiled, and for a moment Rosalind could see the beauty she must have possessed in her youth. "You have a sharp tongue, I am told." "Good. Sebastian respects intelligence and despises simpering. Do not let him turn you into the convenient wife he thinks he wants. Make him see you. Make him feel. And if he refuses? Then you will have a comfortable life as Marchioness and a husband who respects you, which is more than many women achieve." The dowager released her hand and sat back. "But I do not think he will refuse. Not entirely. There is fire in him still, Lady Rosalind. It merely needs the right spark to ignite it." Before Rosalind could respond, the door opened and Sebastian appeared, his expression hovering between anxiety and annoyance. "I believe I told you to ring when you were finished," he said to his grandmother. "I was about to. Your timing is merely impeccable as always." The dowager waved a dismissive hand. "Take your bride-to-be away and show her the gardens. The roses should still be blooming." Sebastian looked between them, clearly trying to assess the damage. "Is everything—" "Everything is perfectly fine. Lady Rosalind and I have reached an understanding." The old woman fixed Rosalind with one final meaningful look. "Remember what I said, my dear. Patience and stubbornness." "Yes, my lady. I shall remember." The gardens of Thornfield Park were extensive, encompassing formal parterre, informal woodland walks, and a rose garden that even in late autumn blazed with colour. Sebastian led Rosalind through them at a measured pace, pointing out features with the same proprietary knowledge he had shown during their drive through the countryside. But Rosalind's mind was elsewhere, turning over the dowager's words like stones in a stream. She found herself watching Sebastian differently now, seeing not the marble facade but the wounds beneath it, the way he held himself slightly apart, even when they walked side by side, the tiny hesitations before he spoke, as though checking each word for dangerous emotion,
the shadows in his grey eyes when he thought she was not looking. "You are very quiet," he observed. "Should I be concerned about what my grandmother said to you? She told me about your sister." Sebastian's stride faltered almost imperceptibly. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Did she?" "She said that losing Arabella changed you, that you have been frozen ever since." For a long moment, he did not respond. They walked in silence through an archway of climbing roses, their petals scattering in the autumn breeze. "My grandmother has always believed that the solution to every problem is to discuss it at length," he said finally. "I have never shared that conviction. Sebastian, I do not wish to speak of Arabella." His voice was sharp, then softened with visible effort. "Not because I am angry with you, because I cannot. Because every time I think of her, I remember finding her—" He stopped, swallowed. "I have trained myself not to think of her. It is the only way I have found to survive." Rosalind's heart ached for him. She understood now the depth of the wound he carried, not merely grief, but guilt, and the terrible conviction that feeling too much led to destruction. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I should not have pressed." "You did not press. You merely stated a fact." He turned to face her, and she saw the effort it cost him to meet her eyes. "I have not spoken of Arabella to anyone except my grandmother in 12 years. The fact that you know about her now that you understand even a fraction of what shaped me is strangely—" He searched for the word. "Relieving. Relieving. I have spent so long pretending to be made of stone. Having someone who knows the truth is unexpectedly freeing." He looked away, toward the garden wall where the last roses clung to their stems. "I do not know what that means for us, Rosalind. I cannot promise you the thawing my grandmother no doubt hopes for. But I can tell you that I am trying, in my own inadequate way." It was the most vulnerable thing he had ever said to her. Rosalind moved closer, close enough to touch him if she dared. "That is all I can ask," she said softly. "That you try." He turned back to face her, and for a moment the mask slipped entirely. She saw not the marble Marquis, but simply Sebastian, wounded, uncertain, reaching for something he was not sure how to find. Then his hand came up to touch her cheek, his fingers gentle against her skin. "You are not what I expected," he said quietly. "When I announced our engagement, I hoped that I was making a necessary sacrifice to save a stranger from ruin. I did not anticipate—" He stopped, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "I did not anticipate you. Is that a complaint?" "It is a confession." His grey eyes searched her face. "I find myself wanting things I had thought myself incapable of wanting. That terrifies me." "What kind of things?" He did not answer with words. Instead, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like the kiss at the Devonshire ball, not a claim or a declaration, but an exploration. His mouth moved against hers with careful tenderness, as though she were something precious he was afraid of breaking. Rosalind felt her heart stutter and her knees weaken, and she gripped his lapels to steady herself. When he finally lifted his head, his breathing was uneven, and his grey eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds. "That," he said roughly. "Things like that." Rosalind could not speak. Her entire world had narrowed to the space between them, the warmth of his hands on her waist, the taste of him lingering on her lips. "We should return to the house." His voice was controlled again, but she could hear the effort beneath it. "Dinner will be served soon." He offered his arm and she took it, and they walked back toward the manor in a silence that felt somehow different from all the silences that had come before. The wedding took place
on a rain-washed morning in late October, in the small chapel at Thornfield Park. Rosalind had expected a grand society affair, but Sebastian had insisted on something intimate, just family and a few close friends, away from the prying eyes of London gossips. As she walked down the aisle toward him, her heart pounding beneath the white silk of her gown, Rosalind found herself grateful for the privacy. This moment felt too fragile, too fraught with possibility, to be shared with strangers who cared nothing for their happiness. Sebastian watched her approach with an expression she could not read. He was immaculate as always, dressed in dark grey that matched his eyes, his face carefully composed. But when she reached his side and placed her hand in his, she felt a tremor in his fingers that betrayed him. He was nervous. The marble marquis was nervous. The realization gave her courage. She squeezed his hand gently, and saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, and then gratitude, and then something warmer that he quickly suppressed. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and sacred promises. Rosalind spoke her vows clearly, meaning every syllable, watching Sebastian's face for any sign of what he felt. He spoke his own vows with the same controlled precision he brought to everything, but his eyes never left hers, and his grip on her hand never loosened. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Sebastian bent to kiss her with a tenderness that made her breath catch. It was a brief kiss, appropriate for the setting. But when he pulled away, his grey eyes held a promise that set her pulse racing. "Lady Thornfield," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "My wife." The word sounded strange on his lips, possessive and protective, and uncertain all at once. Rosalind found herself smiling, despite the nerves that churned in her stomach. "Lord Thornfield, my husband." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a crack in the marble. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, and for a moment she let herself believe that everything would be all right. The wedding breakfast was a subdued affair, as befitted the intimate gathering. The dowager presided over the table with queenly grace, trading barbed remarks with Sebastian's distant cousin Marcus, and charming Rosalind's reluctant brother into something approaching goodwill. Rosalind's mother had been left behind in London, ostensibly to oversee the preparations for the newlyweds' eventual return to town, and the absence was conspicuously peaceful. But Rosalind could not fully relax. As the meal progressed and the hour of departure for her wedding night approached, her nerves wound tighter and tighter. She knew what was expected of her. She was not naive, but the thought of that intimacy with Sebastian, who still felt like a stranger in so many ways, filled her with a complicated mixture of anticipation and terror. She caught Sebastian watching her several times, his grey eyes thoughtful. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he felt any of the same uncertainty that plagued her. Probably not. Men were supposed to be confident about these things. Men were supposed to know what they were doing. When the breakfast finally concluded and the guests departed for their own quarters, Sebastian escorted her upstairs in charged silence. They paused outside the door to the Marchioness's chambers, and Rosalind's heart beat so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "I will give you time to prepare," he said quietly. "I shall come to you in an hour." She nodded, unable to find words, and slipped through the door. The hour passed in a haze of nervous preparation. Her maid helped her out of her wedding gown and into a nightdress of fine white lawn, then brushed out her copper hair until it fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Rosalind stared at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman who looked back at her. Lady Thornfield, Marchioness, wife. She was still staring when the knock came. Sebastian entered slowly, giving her time to object. He had changed into a dressing gown of deep blue silk, and his dark hair was slightly disordered in a way that made him look younger, less controlled. Rosalind. Her name sounded different on his lips than it ever had before, intimate, weighted with meaning. "May I come in?" "You are my husband. You do not need permission."
Nevertheless, I am asking." She nodded, and he crossed the room to stand before her. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, and Rosalind saw her own uncertainty reflected in his grey eyes. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that I will not force anything you do not freely give. If you wish to wait, if you need more time—" "I do not wish to wait." His eyes darkened. "You are certain?" "I am terrified," she admitted, "but I am certain." He reached out to touch her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. "Then we shall be terrified together." What followed was not what she expected. She had braced herself for perfunctory duty, for cold efficiency, for the completion of a contractual obligation. Instead, Sebastian was tender, patient, almost reverent. He treated her body like something precious, murmuring reassurances against her skin, moving slowly enough that she could grow accustomed to each new sensation before he asked for more. When it was over, when she lay breathless and overwhelmed in his arms, she felt him press a kiss to her hair. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I think so." "Yes." She turned her face to look at him, and found his grey eyes watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "That was not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Something colder, more efficient." He was silent for a moment. Then, "I find that I cannot be cold with you. I have tried. It does not seem to work." Before she could respond, he was rising from the bed, reaching for his dressing gown. "I should return to my own chambers. You will want to rest." "You're leaving?" "It is customary for husband and wife to maintain separate quarters." His voice was controlled again, distant. "As we discussed." "I see." Rosalind pulled the covers up around herself, suddenly cold. "Very well." He paused at the door, and she saw something flicker across his face, regret perhaps, or longing, but he did not turn back. "Good night, Lady Thornfield." "Good night, my lord." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Rosalind was left alone in the darkness, her body still warm from his touch, and her heart aching with confused emotion. The weeks that followed their wedding settled into a pattern that Rosalind found increasingly difficult to bear. In public, Sebastian was everything a devoted husband should be. He escorted her to events, introduced her to the important families of the county, supported her efforts to take up her duties as mistress of Thornfield Park. He deferred to her judgment on household matters, praised her intelligence to anyone who would listen, and looked at her across crowded rooms with an expression that set tongues wagging about the love match of the season. In private he was courteous, considerate, and utterly remote. He came to her bed twice more in the first fortnight, performing his husbandly duties with the same devastating tenderness that had marked their wedding night. But he never stayed afterward, never allowed the physical intimacy to extend into emotional vulnerability. As soon as the act was complete, he retreated to his own chambers, leaving Rosalind to puzzle over the contradiction between his passion and his distance. She tried to reach him. She sought him out in his study, suggesting they take meals together, proposing afternoon walks in the gardens he seemed to love. Sometimes he agreed, and they would spend an hour or two in companionable conversation that gave her hope. But inevitably, he would retreat again, the walls rebuilding around him whenever she got too close. It was maddening, and it was breaking her heart in ways she had not anticipated. Because, somewhere in the midst of all the uncertainty, Rosalind had done the one thing she had sworn not to do. She had fallen in love with her husband. She loved his rare, startled laughs, drawn from him against his will by her sharp observations. She loved the way he listened when she spoke, as though her thoughts actually mattered. She loved his devotion to his tenants, his tenderness with his grandmother, the flickers of warmth that escaped through the cracks in his armor. She loved the man he was trying so hard not to be, and she had no idea if he would ever let her in. The crisis came on a grey afternoon in November, nearly a month after the wedding. Rosalind was in her sitting room, reviewing household accounts with the housekeeper, when a footman burst through the door without knocking. "My lady, come quickly, there's a letter, his lordship." The housekeeper was already on her feet, her face pale. "What's happened?" "From London, ma'am. News about Lord Crane." Rosalind's blood ran cold. "Where is Lord Thornfield?" "In his study, my lady. But he told me to fetch you. He's not well." She was running before the footman finished speaking, her skirts bunched in her fists, her heart pounding. She had not seen Sebastian so much as raise his voice in all the weeks of their marriage. What could possibly have undone him? She found him standing at the window of his study, his back to the door, a crumpled letter on the floor at his feet. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. "Sebastian?" She approached slowly, uncertain. "What has happened?" He did not turn. "Lord Crane has been telling tales in London. About you, about our wedding, suggesting that I only married you because you were already carrying my child from some previous liaison." The blood drained from Rosalind's face. "That's absurd. We never before the ballroom. We had barely exchanged a dozen words." "I know. But Crane does not care about truth. He cares about revenge." Sebastian's voice was tight with controlled fury. "He has apparently decided that since he could not have you himself, he will destroy you by any means necessary." "What do the gossips say?" "They say you are ruined beyond redemption. They say our marriage was a desperate attempt to salvage your reputation. They say I was tricked into a union with a fallen woman, and that any child you produce will be illegitimate." Rosalind sank into the nearest chair, her legs unable to support her. After everything, after all they had been through, Crane was still pursuing her, still determined to bring her down. "What do we do?" Sebastian finally turned to face her, and she recoiled from the expression in his eyes. Cold, deadly, more marble than she had ever seen him. "We do nothing. I will handle Crane." "What do you mean, you will handle him?" "I mean I will challenge him to a duel and put a bullet through his lying throat." "Sebastian, no." She was on her feet before she knew she had moved, crossing the space between them to grip his arms. "You cannot duel over gossip. It would only make things worse." "Then what would you have me do? Stand by while he destroys everything I have tried to build? Watch him spread his poison until even our children bear the stain of his lies? There must be another way. There is no other way." His voice cracked, and suddenly she saw the pain beneath the rage. "I thought I could protect you. I thought that giving you my name would be enough. But Crane will never stop, and I cannot. I cannot watch you be destroyed the way Arabella was." He stopped, his face contorted with an anguish she had never seen from him. "Sebastian." She reached up to touch his face, forcing him to look at her. "I am not Arabella. I am not going to break." "You do not understand." His voice was hoarse. "I could not save her. I failed her, and now I am failing you, and I cannot bear it. You are not failing me. You have done nothing but protect me from the moment we met." She cupped his face in her hands, willing him to hear her. "You kissed me in front of 300 people to save my reputation. You gave me your name, your home, your protection. You have done everything in your power to shield me from harm. It was not enough. It was everything." Her voice broke on the word. "Do you not understand? You are not responsible for saving me from the entire world. You are only responsible for standing beside me while we face it together." He stared at her, his grey eyes wide and lost. "Together? Together. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. "I love you, Sebastian. I did not intend to, and I know you did not ask for it, but I love you anyway. And I would rather face 1,000 cranes with you beside me than spend another day watching you destroy yourself with guilt over things you cannot control." For a long, terrible moment, he did not respond. Then his hands came up to grip her shoulders, and he kissed her with a desperation that stole her breath. "I cannot lose you," he said against her mouth. "I cannot. You will not. I am not going anywhere. Rosalind, I love you. Whatever happens with Crane, whatever London says, I love you. Can you not feel it?" He pulled back to look at her, and she saw something shifting in his eyes, the marble cracking, crumbling, falling away. "I feel—" He stopped, started again. "I feel too much. That is the problem. I told myself I would never, that it was too dangerous, but you—" His hands tightened on her shoulders. "I cannot seem to stop." "Then stop trying." She reached up to touch his face again, tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. "Stop trying to be marble. Stop trying to protect yourself from everything that might hurt. Let yourself feel, even if it frightens you. What if I break? Then I will be there to help you put the pieces back together." Something in him shattered. She saw it happen, the final collapse of the walls he had spent 12 years building. And then he was pulling her against him, burying his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking with emotion he could no longer contain. "I love you," he said, the words muffled against her neck. "God help me. I love you. I have loved you since you called Crane a festering boil on the backside of society and looked at me like you expected me to agree." Rosalind laughed through her own tears. "I do not believe I used those exact words." "You did. I remember every word you have ever said to me." He lifted his head to look at her, and his grey eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I have been a fool, a coward. I was so afraid of feeling that I almost lost the chance to feel anything at all." "You have not lost anything. I am right here. Yes." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. "You are right here, my wife, my heart, my salvation. Sebastian. I am sorry it took me so long to say it. I am sorry I made you doubt. But I swear to you, Rosalind, I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." She pulled back to look at him, her heart so full it hurt. "What about Crane?" "We will deal with Crane together, not with duels or dramatics, but with the one weapon he cannot fight, our happiness." He smiled, and it transformed his face entirely. The marble Marquis, finally, irreversibly human. "We will return to London. We will be so obviously, disgustingly in love that no one could possibly believe his lies. And we will watch him destroy himself trying to tear down what we have built. That sounds like an excellent plan. I thought you would approve." He kissed her again, slowly, thoroughly. "I love you, Rosalind Ashworth. I should have said it months ago. I should have said it the moment I kissed you in that ballroom. But I was too afraid to admit what I already knew." "And what did you know?" His grey eyes met hers, soft with emotion she had never dared to hope for. "That you were going to change everything. That nothing would ever be the same. And that for the first time in 12 years, I did not want to be made of stone any more." Rosalind smiled through her tears and pulled him down for another kiss. Outside the window, The grey clouds parted, and a single shaft of sunlight broke through to illuminate the gardens of Thornfield Park. It felt, she thought, like a promise. That night, when Sebastian came to her room, he did not leave. He held her through the darkness, his body curved around hers, his arms a warm and steady presence that chased away the cold fears that had plagued her for so long. When she woke in the night, gasping from a dream of London gossips and pointed fingers, he was there to soothe her back to sleep with soft words and gentle touches. In the morning, when dawn light filtered through the curtains to paint the room in shades of gold, she opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression of wondering tenderness. "Good morning, wife," he said softly. "Good morning, husband." She reached up to trace the curve of his jaw, marveling at the privilege of touching him so freely. "Did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I had thought that caring too much was dangerous. I was wrong. The danger was in not caring enough. Sebastian, I wasted so many years being afraid, years I could have spent living, loving, being happy." He pulled her closer, tucking her head beneath his chin. "I will not waste any more. Whatever time we have, however long or short, I want to spend it with you, fully, completely, without walls." Rosalind felt tears prick her eyes. "That is all I have ever wanted." "Then you shall have it. I am done being marble. I want to be flesh and blood. I want to feel everything, even if it hurts." He tilted her face up to look at him. "Will you help me?" "Always." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and she felt the last of her fears melt away. Whatever came next, Crane's lies, London's gossip, the challenges that any marriage faced, they would face it together. The marble marquis was finally, irreversibly human, and he was hers. They returned to London in early December, when the city was draped in fog and the ton was gathered for the winter social season. Rosalind had expected to feel dread as their carriage rolled through the familiar streets, but with Sebastian's hand warm around hers and his steady presence beside her, she found instead a fierce determination. Let them whisper, let them point. She was Lady Thornfield now, and she had something far more valuable than society's approval. She had a husband who loved her. The first test came at Lady Marchmont's musicale, 3 days after their arrival. It was a relatively small gathering, perhaps 60 guests, but it included some of the most influential hostesses in London, women whose opinions could make or break a reputation with a single raised eyebrow. Rosalind dressed with care, choosing a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her colouring and proclaimed her status as a married woman of consequence. Her maid arranged her copper hair in an elegant sweep that only enhanced its natural wave, and around her throat she wore the Thornfield emeralds, a gift from Sebastian that morning, presented with a kiss and a murmured promise that she would outshine every gem in the collection. "Ready?" Sebastian asked, offering his arm as they prepared to enter the Marchmont townhouse. "As I shall ever be. Remember, we are disgustingly in love, nauseously so. The kind of couple that makes cynical society matrons roll their eyes and secretly wish they had what we have." Despite her nerves, Rosalind laughed. "I believe I can manage that." "I have complete faith in your abilities." He raised her gloved hand to his lips. "And if anyone says anything untoward, I shall simply kiss you again. It worked rather well the first time." "Sebastian!" "What?" "It did. I highly recommend it as a strategy for silencing gossip." His grey eyes sparkled with a warmth she still was not entirely accustomed to seeing. "Shall we?" They entered the musicale together, and Rosalind felt the immediate weight of dozens of staring eyes. The room fell into a hush that lasted perhaps 3 heartbeats, long enough for her to register the curiosity, the speculation, the few openly hostile glances from ladies who had believed Crane's lies. Then Sebastian's arm tightened around hers, and he led her forward with the easy confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. "Lady Marchmont," he bowed over their hostess's hand with perfect courtesy. "Thank you for including us in your guest list. My wife has been so looking forward to tonight's entertainment." Lady Marchmont was a shrewd-eyed woman in her 60s, who had seen countless scandals come and go. Her gaze flickered between Sebastian and Rosalind, assessing, calculating. "Lord Thornfield, Lady Thornfield," her voice carried to the surrounding listeners. "We are delighted to welcome you both. I trust your time in the country was restorative?" "Exceedingly so." Sebastian smiled, and it was the warm, genuine smile that Rosalind had only recently learned he possessed. "My wife has quite transformed. Thornfield Park. The household has never run so smoothly." "Indeed. I had heard Lady Thornfield was a woman of considerable intelligence." Lady Marchmont's tone was carefully neutral, but Rosalind caught the undercurrent of challenge. "She is the most intelligent woman I have ever known." Sebastian looked down at Rosalind with an expression of such open adoration that she felt her cheeks warm. "I count myself the most fortunate of men." The silence that followed was charged with something Rosalind could not quite identify. Then Lady Marchmont smiled a small, approving curve of her lips. "How refreshing to see a love match in these cynical times. You must tell me all about the wedding, Lady Thornfield. I understand it was a private affair." And just like that, the tide began to turn. They spent the next hour circulating through the gathering, Sebastian never leaving her side, his attentiveness a constant, visible proclamation of his devotion. He laughed at her witty observations, deferred to her opinions on the musical selections, and gazed at her with such transparent affection that even the most dedicated gossips began to doubt Crane's version of events. By the time the soprano finished her aria and the guests began to depart, Rosalind could see the shift in the room. The hostile glances had been replaced by curious ones. The whispers had taken on a different tone speculation about the love match, about the Marquis's unexpected transformation, about the clever Blackwood girl who had somehow thawed the marble Marquis. "Well?" Sebastian murmured as they made their way to their carriage. "How do you think it went?" "Better than I expected." Rosalind allowed herself a small smile. "Lady Marchmont actually invited me to tea next week." "Did she? That is significant. Lady Marchmont does not issue invitations lightly." He handed her into the carriage and settled beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. "We make an excellent team, Lady Thornfield." "We do." She leaned into his warmth, feeling some of the tension drain from her shoulders. "Though I must say, your performance tonight was remarkably convincing." "Performance?" He sounded affronted. "I shall have you know that every word was sincere. I do consider myself the most fortunate of men. You are the most intelligent woman I know, and I was looking at you with adoration because I genuinely adore you." "Sebastian, it is rather convenient that our strategy for defeating Crane's lies happens to align perfectly with the truth." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Rosalind. That is not a performance. It is simply a fact." She turned her face to kiss him properly, tasting champagne and promise on his lips. "I love you too, though I still cannot quite believe this is my life." "Believe it." His arms tightened around her. "And trust that it will only get better from here." The weeks that followed proved him right. They attended every significant event of the winter season, presenting a united front that became increasingly difficult to criticize. Sebastian's devotion to his wife was so obvious, so consistent, so clearly genuine, that the whispers about Crane's accusations began to fade into embarrassed silence. It helped that Crane himself was conspicuously absent from society gatherings. Rumour had it that his creditors had finally caught up with him, and that he had fled to the continent to escape debtor's prison. Rosalind felt a grim satisfaction at the news, not because she wished him ill exactly, but because his absence removed the last source of the poison that had threatened to destroy her. By January, the Ton had largely moved on to fresher scandals. The Thornfield marriage was old news now, remarkable only for how unexpectedly happy it appeared to be. Rosalind heard herself described as clever and refreshing, rather than sharp-tongued and difficult. Sebastian was no longer the marble marquis, but simply Thornfield, a man who had surprised everyone by falling genuinely in love with his unconventional wife. It was, Rosalind reflected, rather satisfying. But the true measure of their victory came at the Devonshire ball, the same event where everything had begun 1 year earlier. Rosalind dressed in gold silk this time, a colour she would never have dared to wear in her unmarried days, but which suited her admirably now. The Thornfield diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, and her copper hair was arranged in an elaborate style that her mother would have called finally acceptable. "You look beautiful," Sebastian said, watching her descend the stairs of their London townhouse. His grey eyes held an appreciation that still made her heart flutter after months of marriage. "Though I find myself hoping we will not be required to stay too late. We have only just arrived." "I am aware. Nevertheless." He offered his arm with a smile that promised pleasant things for later. "Shall we?" The Devonshire ballroom was as magnificent as Rosalind remembered, perhaps more so, since she was seeing it through different eyes. Last year she had stood at the edges, trying to be invisible, dreading her mother's matchmaking attempts and society's judgment. Tonight she entered on the arm of the most eligible man in England, who happened to be her husband, and who loved her with a devotion that still astonished her. The contrast was almost dizzying. "Are you well?" Sebastian murmured, sensing her distraction. "I was remembering last year, standing by those roses, watching you across the room, never imagining that I would cross the floor and kiss you senseless in front of 300 witnesses. That, yes." She smiled up at him, though I believe the correct number was closer to 400. "Details." He guided her through the crowd, nodding to acquaintances, exchanging greetings with those who mattered. "What matters is that I kissed you, and that you eventually forgave me for the rather irregular manner of my proposal. I believe I did more than forgive you." "Indeed you did." His eyes darkened with an emotion that made her breath catch. "Speaking of which, I have been meaning to ask, should we not perhaps retire to the terrace, for old time's sake? Sebastian, it is barely 9 o'clock." "So it is. Far too early for impropriety." He sighed dramatically. "I suppose we must do our social duty and circulate, but I reserve the right to steal you away later." "I shall look forward to it." They danced the first waltz together, moving through the steps with an ease born of practice and genuine partnership. Rosalind was aware of the watching eyes, the whispers behind fans, but she found she did not care. Let them look. Let them see what she and Sebastian had built from the ashes of scandal. "You're smiling," Sebastian observed. "I am happy." "Are you?" His grey eyes searched her face. "Truly?" "Truly." She squeezed his hand. "I never thought I would say that about my life. But here I am, married to a man I love, respected by society despite everything that happened, and dancing at the ball where I was nearly destroyed a year ago. How could I not be happy?" "I can think of one way you might be happier." His voice dropped to a murmur meant for her ears alone. "I was rather hoping to discuss it with you later." in private. What sort of discussion requires privacy? The sort that involves significantly fewer clothes than we are currently wearing. Rosalind's cheeks flushed, but she laughed, despite herself. "Sebastian, we are in the middle of the dance floor." "I had noticed. It is remarkably inconvenient." He spun her through a turn with practiced grace, though I suppose the anticipation adds to the eventual satisfaction. "You are incorrigible. I prefer to think of myself as devoted. There is a subtle distinction." The music ended, and Sebastian led her off the floor toward the refreshment table. They had barely reached it when a familiar figure materialized from the crowd, a figure that made Rosalind's smile freeze on her face. Lord Bartholomew Crane. He was thinner than she remembered, his face gaunt, and his clothing slightly shabby in a way that suggested his financial difficulties were worse than rumored. But his eyes held the same malicious gleam, and his smile was a blade poorly concealed behind a veneer of courtesy. "Lord Thornfield, Lady Thornfield." He bowed with exaggerated formality. "How delightful to see you both. I had heard you were the toast of the season, but I confess I was skeptical. Old habits and all that." Sebastian's arm tightened around Rosalind's waist, but his voice remained perfectly controlled. "Crane, I had understood you were on the continent." "I was. A brief sojourn to attend to some business matters." Crane's smile widened. "But I could not miss the Devonshire ball. So many memories, you understand. This very spot, in fact, is where you made that rather theatrical declaration last year. I must say, I was impressed by your commitment to the performance." "There was no performance." Sebastian's tone was ice. "I announced my betrothal to the woman I loved. There was nothing theatrical about it." "The woman you loved? How touching." Crane's gaze slid to Rosalind with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Tell me, Lady Thornfield, have you managed to convince your husband of your virtue yet? Or does he still harbor doubts about what happened in that library?" "Nothing happened in that library," Rosalind said, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "As I have said countless times, you followed me in uninvited and I left. That is the entire story." "Is it? That's not how I remember it." Crane leaned closer, his breath sour with wine. "I remember a woman who was rather more accommodating. But perhaps you have forgotten. Memory is such a fickle thing." Sebastian moved so quickly that Rosalind barely saw it happen. One moment he was standing beside her, his arm around her waist. The next, he had Crane by the collar, his grey eyes blazing with a fury that made the marble marquis look like a distant memory. "You will never," Sebastian said, his voice low and deadly, "speak to my wife again. You will never speak of my wife again. If I hear so much as a whisper of your lies crossing anyone's lips, I will destroy you, not with duels or dramatics, but with the full weight of my fortune, my influence, and my determination. Do you understand me?" Crane's face had gone pale. "Thornfield, I was merely... Do you understand me?" "Yes." The word came out as a croak. "Yes, I understand." "Good." Sebastian released him with a shove that sent Crane stumbling backward. "Now get out of my sight. And if you have any sense remaining in that pickled brain of yours, get out of England while you still can." Crane fled. There was no other word for it. He turned and practically ran for the nearest exit, his shoulders hunched and his face a mask of humiliated fury. The ballroom, which had fallen silent during the confrontation, erupted in whispers. But they were different whispers than Rosalind had endured before. Approving whispers, impressed whispers, the kind of whispers that attached themselves to a man who had defended his wife's honor with such magnificent ferocity. Sebastian turned back to Rosalind, his expression shifting from rage to concern in an instant. Are you all right? I should have controlled myself better. You were magnificent." She reached up to straighten his cravat, which had become disordered during the confrontation. "Though I believe you may have terrified half the room." "Only half? I must be losing my touch." His grey eyes searched her face. "Truly, Rosalind, are you well?" "I am better than well. I am married to a man who would threaten to destroy someone for speaking ill of me. How could I possibly be anything but well?" The corner of his mouth curved into a smile. "I suppose that is one way to look at it." "It is the only way to look at it." She rose on her toes to press a kiss to his cheek, uncaring of the watching eyes. "I love you, Sebastian Ashworth. Marble Marquis no more." "I love you too, Rosalind Ashworth." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her in full view of the assembled ton, sharp tongue and all. Around them the whispers continued, but they were the whispers of people witnessing something rare and precious. A love match. A happy ending. A couple who had found each other despite every obstacle and emerged stronger for the struggle. Rosalind closed her eyes and let herself be held, feeling the steady beat of Sebastian's heart against her cheek. This, she thought, was what happiness felt like. Spring came early that year, painting the gardens of Thornfield Park in shades of green and gold. Rosalind stood at the window of her sitting room, watching the first daffodils push through the soil, and felt a contentment so profound it almost frightened her. 6 months of marriage. 6 months of learning Sebastian's moods and habits, his fears and hopes, the places where his walls still sometimes rose, and the ways she had learned to gently dismantle them. 6 months of building a life together, a partnership that grew stronger with each passing day. And now, something new. She pressed her hand to her still flat stomach, marveling at the secret she had confirmed only that morning. The doctor had been cautiously optimistic she was young and healthy, and there was every reason to expect a successful pregnancy. But Rosalind knew the risks, knew that joy could turn to grief in an instant. She had seen it happen to others. Still, she could not suppress the flutter of hope in her chest. A child. Sebastian's child. A new life growing inside her, the tangible proof of everything they had built together. She had not yet told him. She wanted to find the right moment, the right words. Sebastian had never spoken much about children, and she did not know how he would react. He had opened his heart so completely in the past months that she sometimes forgot how long he had kept it closed. The prospect of fatherhood might stir old fears, old wounds, or it might bring him joy beyond anything he had known. The door opened behind her, and she turned to find Sebastian entering with a bundle of papers in his hand. Estate business, probably, the never-ending work of managing Thornfield's vast holdings. "There you are." He crossed the room to press a kiss to her forehead. "I thought you might like to walk in the gardens. The weather is fine, and the gardener tells me the first roses are nearly ready to bloom." "That sounds lovely." She hesitated, her hand still pressed to her stomach. "But first I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made him go still. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong." She took a deep breath. "Sebastian, we're going to have a child." The papers slipped from his fingers, scattering across the floor in a flutter of white. His face went blank for a long moment, so long that Rosalind felt a flutter of fear. Then he was pulling her into his arms, his face buried in her hair, his shoulders shaking with what she realized, with amazement, were sobs. "Sebastian?" She pulled back to look at him, alarmed. "What is it? Are you not happy?" "Happy?" He laughed, a broken sound that held more joy than grief. "I am terrified. I am overwhelmed. I am more happy than I have ever been in my entire life." He cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes bright with tears. "A child, Rosalind. Our child." "Yes." She smiled through her own sudden tears. "Our child. I never thought, I never allowed myself to imagine—" He stopped, overcome. "After Arabella, I thought I would never have a family again. I thought it was too dangerous, that love only led to loss. But you have given me everything. Everything I thought I could never have. You gave it to yourself. You chose to let yourself feel again. You chose to open your heart." She kissed him softly. "I am merely the beneficiary of your courage." "My courage?" He shook his head. "No, you are the one who was brave. You looked at a man made of marble and saw something worth loving. You refused to let me hide. You challenged me at every turn, forced me to feel, demanded that I become the man I was always meant to be. Sebastian, I was dead inside before you. I thought that was safety. I thought that was survival." His hands tightened on her face. "But it was not life. It was merely existence. You gave me life, Rosalind. You gave me everything." She pulled him down to kiss her, tasting salt and love, and a future she had never dared to dream of. Outside the window, the spring sun shone on the gardens of Thornfield Park, and somewhere in the distance a bird sang its heart out to the sky. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you more than I have words to express." He pulled back to look at her, his grey eyes soft with wonder. "A child. I am going to be a father. You are going to be a wonderful father. How can you know that?" "Because I know you." She took his hand and pressed it to her stomach, where new life was quietly growing. "Because you love so deeply once you allow yourself to love. Our child will never doubt that they are cherished. They will grow up knowing what we both had to learn, that love is not a weakness, but a strength." Sebastian stared at his hand on her stomach, his expression shifting through wonder, fear, hope, and finally settling into a joy so pure it transformed his face entirely. "I spent 12 years being afraid to feel," he said quietly. 12 years hiding behind walls, convinced that safety lay in stone rather than flesh. And in one kiss, one mad, impulsive, completely indefensible kiss, I destroyed everything I thought I knew about myself. Do you regret it? Regret it?" He laughed, the sound full and free. "It was the best decision I have ever made, though I confess at the time I had no idea what I was doing." "Neither did I. I thought you had lost your mind." "I had. I lost my mind completely." He grinned, looking younger than she had ever seen him. "And found my heart instead. A fair trade, all things considered." The summer passed in a haze of anticipation and preparation. Rosalind's pregnancy progressed without complication, and as her belly swelled with new life, the household seemed to swell with joy. Servants who had known Sebastian since childhood marveled at the change in him, the smiles that came easily now, the laughter that rang through halls that had been silent for too long. The Dowager Marchioness wept when they told her the news, clutching Rosalind's hands in her own and thanking God for answered prayers. "I knew it," she said, her bright eyes shining. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were the one who would bring him back to life. And now you are giving him a child. My heart is full, my dear, fuller than I ever thought possible." Even Rosalind's mother seemed genuinely pleased, though she could not resist offering advice on everything from nursery arrangements to proper nutrition for expectant mothers. Rosalind bore it with better grace than she once would have, recognizing that behind her mother's criticism lay a genuine, if imperfectly expressed, concern for her well-being. The baby was born on a crisp October morning, as leaves scattered across the grounds of Thornfield Park, and the last roses of the season clung to their stems. It was a difficult labour, long hours of pain and fear that left Rosalind exhausted, and Sebastian half mad with worry. But when it was over, when the thin wail of new life filled the room, everything else faded to insignificance. "A girl!" the midwife announced, placing the tiny, squalling bundle in Rosalind's arms. "A perfect, healthy girl." Rosalind looked down at her daughter's face, red and wrinkled and impossibly beautiful, and felt something shift inside her. A new kind of love, fierce and protective and utterly overwhelming. This small person, this miracle of flesh and blood, was hers to protect, to nurture, to guide into the world. "Sebastian," her voice was hoarse from hours of labour, "come and meet your daughter." He approached the bed with the caution of a man handling something impossibly fragile, his grey eyes wide with wonder. When Rosalind transferred the baby into his arms, she saw his face transform the same expression of wonder and terror and overwhelming love that she felt in her own heart. "She's so small," he whispered, "so perfect. She has your eyes, I think, grey, like storm clouds. And your hair." He touched the tiny tuft of copper fuzz on the baby's head. "She'll be a beauty, and stubborn as her mother. Is that a complaint?" "It is a fervent hope." He looked up at Rosalind, and she saw tears tracking down his cheeks. "Thank you. For her. For everything." "You do not need to thank me. She is ours. We made her together." "Yes." He looked back down at the baby in his arms, his expression softening into something that made Rosalind's heart ache with love. "We made her together. Our family." They named her Arabella, after the sister Sebastian had lost a tribute and a promise, a declaration that love could endure even the deepest grief. The dowager wept again when she heard, pressing kisses to her great-granddaughter's tiny forehead, and declaring her the most beautiful child ever born. "She looks just like her namesake," the old woman said, tracing the baby's delicate features with one gnarled finger. "The same red hair, the same stubborn little chin. Arabella would have loved her." "She would have loved you too, grandmother." Sebastian put his arm around the old woman's shoulders, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have loved seeing how happy you are. I am happy, happier than I have been in 20 years. The dowager looked between Sebastian, Rosalind, and the baby with shining eyes. "My boy is finally whole again. That is all I ever wanted." 8 years later, the Thornfield family had grown in ways Rosalind could never have imagined. There were 4 children now. Arabella, the eldest, with her copper curls and her father's grey eyes, and a sharp tongue that got her into trouble nearly as often as it had her mother. The twins, William and Catherine, dark-haired like Sebastian, and inseparable from the moment of their birth. And little Henry, barely a year old, who had inherited Rosalind's green eyes, and was already showing signs of his father's stubborn determination. Thornfield Park rang with noise and chaos and joy. Children ran through corridors that had once echoed with silence, their laughter filling every corner of the ancient house. The gardens that Rosalind had first seen on a grey afternoon before her wedding now bloomed with new life flowers she had planted herself. A kitchen garden that provided vegetables for the nursery table. A secret bower where she and Sebastian sometimes escaped for moments of quiet together. The dowager had passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years ago, surrounded by family and love. Sebastian had grieved deeply, but it was a clean grief this time, the mourning of a man who knew how to feel loss without being destroyed by it. They had named their youngest son Henry in honor of her late husband, a tribute that would have pleased her. Rosalind's mother had mellowed somewhat over the years, her criticism giving way to a grudging pride in the family her difficult youngest daughter had built. She visited Thornfield Park every summer, dispensing unsolicited advice and spoiling her grandchildren with sweets and presents. It was not the relationship Rosalind had once wished for, but it was enough. And Sebastian had transformed so completely that people who had known the Marble Marquis could hardly believe he was the same man. He laughed easily now, teased his children mercilessly, and looked at Rosalind with an expression of such open love that it still made her heart flutter after nearly a decade of marriage. He had never fully escaped the shadow of his losses. There were still nights when he woke from dreams of Arabella, still moments when grief crossed his face like a passing cloud. But he no longer tried to hide from feeling. He let himself experience joy and sorrow alike, trusting that Rosalind would be there to share both. On the 8th anniversary of their wedding, Sebastian surprised Rosalind with an invitation. "The Devonshire Ball," he said, presenting the engraved card with a flourish. "Our presence is specifically requested. The Duchess was most insistent." Rosalind looked at the invitation with a mixture of amusement and nostalgia. "Has it really been 8 years?" "Nearly 9 since I kissed you in the middle of that ballroom and accidentally proposed marriage." "Accidentally?" She raised an eyebrow. "I seem to recall you announcing our betrothal with complete certainty." "I was improvising. There is a subtle distinction." He grinned, looking so much like their son William that Rosalind's heart clenched. "What do you say? Shall we attend? For old time's sake? Who will watch the children?" "The nursery maids, the governess, the nanny, and my grandmother's old companion, who has specifically requested the honor of spoiling them beyond recognition in our absence." Sebastian took her hands in his. "One night, Rosalind. Let me take my wife to a ball and remind her of how we began." She could not resist him. She had never been able to resist him. Not from the moment he crossed that ballroom floor and claimed her with a kiss. "Very well. But if you kiss me in front of everyone again, I shall not be responsible for the consequences." "I make no promises." His grey eyes sparkled. "Some habits are too enjoyable to break." The Devonshire Ball was as magnificent as ever, perhaps more so, since the Duchess had recently completed extensive renovations to the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across the polished floor, and the music was provided by an orchestra imported from Vienna specifically for the occasion. Rosalind entered on Sebastian's arm, wearing a gown of deep burgundy silk that suited her maturity and status as mother of 4. Her copper hair, which had finally learned to behave after 20 years of rebellion, was arranged in an elegant style that displayed the Thornfield rubies to full advantage. She was not the same woman who had hidden by the roses all those years ago, dreading her mother's matchmaking and society's judgment. She was Lady Thornfield, beloved wife and respected marchioness, mother to 4 healthy children, mistress of one of the finest estates in England. She was happy. Genuinely, profoundly, unshakably happy. "You're smiling," Sebastian observed. "I was thinking about how much has changed. The last time we were here I was terrified, humiliated, convinced my life was over. And now? Now I know it. Now I was only beginning." She squeezed his arm. "Thank you, Sebastian, for kissing me that night, for changing everything." "I believe I am the one who should be thanking you." He guided her through the crowd, nodding to acquaintances and friends. "You transformed me from a frozen statue into an actual human being. That seems like rather a significant accomplishment." "It was a team effort." "Was it?" "I recall being rather resistant to transformation." "Extremely resistant. I had to be quite stubborn." "Fortunately, stubbornness is one of your many virtues." He stopped near the terrace doors, the same doors where they had first collided all those years ago. "Do you remember?" I remember everything. Crashing into you, insulting you, running away from my mother. Rosalind smiled at the memory. You were so cold, so disapproving. I never imagined. Neither did I. Sebastian turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. When I walked into this ballroom 9 years ago, I thought I knew exactly what my life would look like. A strategic marriage, an heir or two, a continuation of the Thornfield legacy in the proper manner. I thought I had everything under control. And then you kissed a scandalous redhead in front of 400 witnesses. The best decision I ever made. His grey eyes held hers, warm with love and memory. I told myself it was about honor, about duty, about protecting an innocent woman from Crane's lies. But I think even then, I knew there was something more. Something about the way you looked at me, no fear, no simpering, just that sharp intelligence that refused to be cowed. I thought you were insufferable. I was. I still am, on occasion. He smiled. But you love me anyway. I do. Insufferability and all. Sebastian lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to each palm. Thank you, Rosalind, for not giving up on me, for breaking down my walls when I was determined to keep them standing, for giving me 4 children, a home full of chaos and noise, and a reason to feel alive. Sebastian, I spent 12 years being afraid to feel. 12 years convinced that love was too dangerous, that caring too much could only lead to loss. He shook his head. What a waste. All that time I could have spent living, loving, being happy, thrown away on fear. You are not wasting time now. No. And I never will again. He released her hands and offered his arm. Dance with me, Lady Thornfield. Let us scandalize the ton one more time. They moved onto the dance floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. It was the same dance they had shared 8 years ago, the first time they had touched as an engaged couple, the first time Rosalind had glimpsed the man beneath the marble. But everything else had changed. Sebastian held her closer than propriety demanded, his hand warm on her waist, his grey eyes never leaving her face. They moved together with the ease of long partnership, anticipating each other's movements, communicating, without words. Around them, the ballroom whirled in a blur of colour and light. Rosalind caught glimpses of familiar faces, friends they had made over the years, allies in the ongoing social dance of the ton. She saw Lady Marchmont watching them with approving eyes, and the Duchess of Devonshire smiling from her position by the orchestra. But mostly, she saw Sebastian, her husband, the father of her children, the man who had transformed from stone to flesh, from fear to love, from the marble Marquis to simply Sebastian, the man who had given her everything she never knew she wanted. I love you, she said, as the waltz drew to a close. I love you more. He pulled her closer still, his lips brushing her ear. And I intend to prove it, repeatedly, for the rest of our lives. Is that a promise? It is a vow, a sacred, binding, utterly unbreakable vow. He pulled back to look at her, his grey eyes shining. You are my heart, Rosalind Ashworth. You saved me from a life of cold emptiness. You gave me children and laughter, and a home that actually feels like a home. Whatever years we have left, they are yours. The music ended. The dancers around them drifted away, seeking refreshments or new partners. But Sebastian and Rosalind stood frozen in place, wrapped in each other's arms, oblivious to the watching world. "Do you remember what you said?" Rosalind asked. "After you kissed me that first time." "I said we should announce our betrothal. You said you hoped everyone would wish us very happy." She smiled up at him. "Are we? Happy?" Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had challenged him, changed him, loved him despite every wall he had built. This woman who had given him a family, a purpose, a reason to feel alive. "Beyond measure," he said, "beyond anything I ever dared to dream." He bent to kiss her then, soft and sweet, a promise and a celebration wrapped in a single gesture. Around them, the ballroom carried on music and laughter, and the eternal dance of society. But Rosalind and Sebastian were in their own world, wrapped in a love that had been tested by scandal and strengthened by time. 9 years ago, he had kissed her to end a rumor. The whole ballroom had seen. He had been forced to marry her, and it had been the beginning of everything. Outside the tall windows of the Devonshire ballroom, the London night glittered with 1,000 lights. Somewhere in the crowd, whispers circulated, not gossip or scandal this time, but simply observation, admiration, a universal acknowledgement that the Thornfield marriage was one of the great love stories of the age. But Rosalind did not care about whispers anymore. She had everything she had ever wanted, not the safe spinsterhood she had once imagined, but something far richer and more rewarding. A husband who loved her, children who filled her heart, a life of purpose and meaning and joy. When Sebastian finally released her, his grey eyes soft with emotion, she reached up to touch his face. "Take me home," she said. "To Thornfield Park? To wherever you are. That is home now." His smile was the warm, genuine expression that still took her breath away after all these years. "Then we shall never be far from home, Lady Thornfield, because wherever you are, that is where I belong." They left the ball early. Scandalizing no one, the ton had long since accepted that the Thornfields were hopelessly, disgustingly, nauseously devoted to each other. Their carriage carried them through the London streets, past the townhouse where Rosalind had once hidden from her mother's matchmaking, past the park where they had driven during their engagement, past all the landmarks of a life they had built together. And as the city gave way to countryside, and the stars emerged overhead, Rosalind leaned against her husband's shoulder and closed her eyes. She had come so far from the sharp-tongued spinster who had resigned herself to loneliness. She had been transformed just as surely as Sebastian had, not into someone different, but into the fullest version of herself. The woman she had always been capable of becoming, if only she had been brave enough to try. "What are you thinking?" Sebastian asked, his voice low in the darkness. "That I am grateful. For all of it, even the scandal, even the pain, because it brought me to you. And I am grateful that I lost my mind sufficiently to kiss you in front of 400 witnesses." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Best decision I ever made." "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." They rode in comfortable silence as the miles passed. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of their fears. Behind them, London glittered with its endless dramas and scandals. Ahead of them, Thornfield Park waited full of children and chaos and the life they had made together. When they finally arrived home, dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. The house was quiet, the children still sleeping, the servants only beginning to stir. Sebastian helped Rosalind down from the carriage and led her through the familiar halls to their chambers. But instead of going inside, he stopped at the window that overlooked the gardens, the same gardens where he had first kissed her properly, the same gardens where she had told him she loved him. "Look," he said softly. Rosalind looked. The first light of dawn was touching the roses, turning them from grey shadows to bursts of colour. The dew on the grass sparkled like scattered diamonds. And in the distance, a lark was beginning its morning song. "Beautiful," she breathed. "Yes." But when she turned to look at him, His grey eyes were fixed on her face. Beautiful. He kissed her as the sun rose over Thornfield Park, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. It was a kiss that held everything: passion and tenderness, memory and hope, the weight of the past and the promise of the future. When they finally drew apart, Rosalind was smiling. "I love you, Sebastian Ashworth." "I love you too, Rosalind Ashworth." He tucked a strand of copper hair behind her ear. "Marble Marquis no more." "No," she agreed. "Just Sebastian, just mine." "Always." The sun continued to rise, flooding the world with light and warmth. Somewhere in the house, a child's voice called out. Arabella, probably, who had inherited her mother's habit of waking early, and the sounds of the household coming to life began to fill the air. But for a few more moments they stayed at the window, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the day begin. 9 years ago, a kiss had changed everything. And now, standing in the home they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created, Rosalind knew with absolute certainty that everything had changed for the better. She was exactly where she was meant to be.